the pivotal figure comes down to Donald Trump. As always, will he back Erdogan's play?
Hi everybody, this is Crypto Rich, working with you to get rich with crypto. I am very, very thrilled and delighted to have with me once again Tom Luongo of tomluongo.me. He is a genius when it comes to political commentary and economic analysis, at least in my book anyway, right? I've learned so much from him. And every now and then we get together to discuss issues that we're both interested in. So here he is. Tom, thank you so much for making yourself available.
Oh, sure. Absolutely, Rich. Anytime.
Yes, thank you, thank you. And what we're going to cover, right, we've discussed it beforehand, Syria and Turkey, the Democratic Party, the impact of the coronavirus, Brexit in Europe, Bitcoin gold. No, I didn't say gold. Bitcoin analysis, unless you want to do a bit of gold as well, right? And also the carnivore diet, because I've been high-fat, low-carb for 8 years. Mm-hmm. And you have, I think, have been paleo and you've switched over to carnivore. So we'll talk about that as well. Sure. And my intention is that we do each as a discrete section. And I'm going to ask people to, this is going to go on Tom's channel and also on my BitTube and YouTube channels. So please subscribe, comment, ask questions, everything.
Want to get more Bitcoin? Well, one way to get more Bitcoin is by mining, and you can mine with elevategroup.io. They're in Irkutsk, so they have really cheap electricity. You can buy the miners online, and these are the miners that are currently available at the time of recording. You can track their progress, see what they're doing. Your miners are doing through the...
Anything you want to say, Tom, just to get us going?
It's not like there's nothing going on in the world. So yeah, no, let's just get started. Is this enough to cover? You know, we don't need to belabor the point. Everybody who's going to watch this on my channel already knows who I am. So we're good to go. You know, like, subscribe, do the thing. You know, it's all down below in the description. Let's get started.
Okay, and then do you want to do the? Should we start with Bitcoin technical analysis?
Sure. Why don't we start there?
You do a monthly newsletter.
Yes, I do. Called Gold, Goats, and Guns. Yeah, and Bitcoin's actually in my portfolio. I just added it in what I would consider my insurance portfolio or my hedge portfolio. The other day, I closed out my Dow position 3 weeks before the Dow crashed, and I closed out at the beginning of last issue and added a Bitcoin hedge in December, I think, right as it busted out above 7,500 or so, saying that was prescient. So yeah, I mean, I do gold as well, and it's really an oil, gold, and cryptos related portfolio, which is what I think is long term going to kind of defend people against all the crazy stuff that's happening, because gold insulates you against, you know, effectively inflationary effects around the world, just to dumb it way down. And on the back end of this, energy is going to be a very it's going to be a very strong play. Not now, but in about 2 years, it's going to be a very strong play, because energy will have, as we've seen, crash. And so, you know, being in energy and energy shipping, I think that's really where the money's going to be, in terms of making it easy for people to ride out the next 10 to 15 years worth of political and social unrest, which is coming, and which we're going to talk about for the rest of the day. So that's kind of the way the portfolio is structured. It's structured around the idea of savings, investment, and insurance, and then like speculative bets on the side. And that's gold, goats, and guns in that order. Gold being your savings, guns being your industry, goats being your industry, and guns being your defense. So that's the way I look at it.
Okay, very good. Very good. Do you want to share your screen? We'll look at the Bitcoin.
Yeah, let me see if I can remember how to do that, and then we'll go, hey, share. Is this the share screen thing? Yeah, we're going to share that screen, which will be, let's do that, because that's my other monitor. All right, can you guys see that? I'm going to bring up, I've got investing.com open. Let's look at gold real quick, right? And I'll make it really big. Everything look good?
Yes.
Yes, you got it?
Yep, that's
okay.
Chart.
So right now we're looking at the 15-minute chart. I don't consider that all that interesting. I don't do short-term stuff, though I do find it interesting. Looking at this short-term chart right here this morning, after the European Open that we had on the European Open, that we've made a low on the European Open right at 2:45 a.m. and we retested that low this morning right before what amounts to the New York Open, and we're tracing a reversal signal right here. But let's move out in time and let's get out where things actually matter. And that's, and you know, when you're looking at long-term charts, or you're looking at, if you want to know what's going to happen trend-wise, and you're looking at bigger trends, you ignore everything less than a weekly chart in terms of time time scale. Even daily charts are, for the most part, noise. I don't even, I do weekly charts because I do weekly updates for my subscribers on Patreon, but really it's the monthly and quarterly charts I care about. So this is investing.com. If you don't know it, I'll make this chart a little bit bigger. If you don't know it, you should know it. It's one of the best free sites for getting good analysis and getting good market information that you can get on the internet without having to have, spend thousands of dollars a year on Bloomberg terminal. And I'll be frank and honest with you about that. $40 a year to get rid of their ads, and then you're good to go. And as far as I'm concerned. So, I mean, unless you want to deal with the ads, which are literally virus-like. All right. The weekly chart here in gold. Let's start from the beginning here. Going back to to middle of 2019, we had a really nice rally in gold off of the 1300 level, up above, breaking through the post-Brexit high and closing off above 1500, above 1560. That sets your high. So in any correction coming down, what you're interested in is how far is it going to correct, and then what happens from there. And from my perspective here, this is a very constructive 18-week downtrend from August into the end of December, because the whole thing plays out within the context of these 3 bars back here, which this is the last bit up in the entire bull market run here. So from this perspective, this is very strong technically. It doesn't matter if you're looking at a weekly chart or a monthly chart or anything else. All these rules apply. If it's a monthly chart you're looking at here, then this is a really strong formation through time, saying that this becomes a very, very significant technical bottom. Weekly charts, less significant. Obviously, daily chart, less significant than that. Quarterly chart, more significant. So looking at this, no shock to me that the minute the market showed any amount of strength at all, it rallied. And it rallied very, very hard up towards $1,700 last week, but then immediately reversed. And this bar right here is what we would consider a reversal bar. And the reason is because it closes, and a red bar means that it opened high and closed low. And the red bar tells you that we closed below the previous week's low, meaning last week's low was not, there was not a supply of buyers to support the price there. Therefore, we're going lower. No shock there. It was a tumultuous week. Dow lost 6,000 points. So gold correcting back to 1566, but then this week opening higher is a good sign that this area is going to stabilize. But as of right now, this bar is dominant on the weekly chart, and therefore gold is likely not to rally here. It's likely at best to consolidate recent gains and hold this 1500, maybe this low here at around 1551. So between there and 1650 would set up a new trading range. That's what I would think right now, as of right now, until this high is bested or this low is bested, because they're setting the edges of the market right now. That's what I would suggest is going on in gold at a weekly level. At a monthly level, you see a less noisy version of the same thing. What's interesting about this is that going back to January is that you have a first stage rally here, and then a second stage on the rally gets a little noisier, but still all within the context of this last up bar, and then a big, huge push up. Third stage rallies almost always fail. They just run out of energy. And so no shock here that this is probably going to wind up becoming a major high in gold, and gold bugs should probably not expect to see prices above 1,700 unless, war breaks out between Turkey and Syria. Last thing to talk about technically, because I know you guys care about it, is Bitcoin. So we'll do the Bitcoin analysis real quick. This is the investing.com Bitcoin index, not any particular, any particular exchange. They do an aggregate of all the exchanges and then give us a price. I'm going to get rid of that. And that's the daily chart. Interesting today that the daily chart, again, we're in the territory here to throw a reversal signal here. We're trading right now above this previous low, previous high in the downtrend. So here's a 7-day downtrend and then a reversal here. Potential reversal. We got to close above this for the day. So if this 7,800 level, or sorry, 8790 level holds, then we'll see that. Going out into the weekly chart, what you have is a deeper but still pretty constructive downtrend from last year's high above nearly 14, around 14. Comes in at previous support levels in this 6,500 range or so, never really closing below 7,000, and if so, just barely. All dips below 7,000 are met with buying, and then that forms a base. We got a breakout. That breakout runs into resistance here at 10.5. We got a 2-bar reversal into that, and that this is the last up bar in the trend. and then we don't close below. No, we did close below. This is a 1 bar reversal right here, and we got a 1 bar reversal down, and now we're in the same position that gold is in. This low has to hold on a closing basis, or this high has to be bested in order for Bitcoin to either break out or further break down. My bet is that we're going to see buyers come in here and the 8,000 level, form a bottom here, and then we're good to go. And if so, then we have a low, a higher high, and then a higher low, and that's the beginning of a bull trend. So that's what I'm saying. And I'll stop sharing my screen so we can get back to talking about other things.
Thank you so much. And and
FYI, this is what I do twice a week for my patrons on Patreon. We cover 4 to 5 different markets on Wednesdays and Sunday mornings, and I do that kind of technical analysis along with some quantitative stuff that goes along with that. This is just basic everyday, this is just basic everyday chart reading. Where all the nonsense is stripped out. I don't use the Tomoko clouds. Obviously, I don't use any of the other. I just, to me, open, high, low, close. It's the real data. Those are the data points we know. Everything else is an interpretation of that data, and therefore is subject to an interpretive
errors.
Error. Yeah, error is a good word. Yeah, it really is. And we get into things like reification and whatnot, where you start to see patterns that actually aren't there because we're really good at pattern recognition because we're pattern recognition tool using monkeys. That's who we are. You have to strip that out of our analysis if you want to know anything about what's going on in markets.
That's what we are. Thank you. And I think it's quite remarkable that you do so well with candles.
Honestly, it's just candles will tell you everything you need to know. I mean, the Japanese they developed them and they used them, and they did use nothing else for thousands of years before we started getting fancy with freaking calculators and calculus. And to be honest with you, I think where we are in the world today is that there's too much calculus and not enough. There weren't enough buyers and sellers there. The market psychology is staring you in the face once you know how to read candles. Yep. And markets don't trade on fundamentals. Everybody wants them to trade on fundamentals because fundamentals are easy. We can calculate P/E ratios, we can calculate profit and loss, and we can go, that seems expensive. But markets don't trade on that. Markets trade on sentiment and momentum. They trade on emotion.
Very good.
They eventually reflect fundamentals, but they can not reflect fundamentals far longer than you can stay solvent.
Yeah. Now, speaking of fundamentals, there is some big fundamental changes happening at a global level, and I'm referring in particular to the coronavirus. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not in any way a medical expert, nor are you a medical expert in any way, right? So we're not going to be talking about that. What we're going to be talking about is the economic and political impact of that, where it might go. And I think the segue could be, well, what will Bitcoin and gold do in the face of that? And how are the banks going to, just what do you see?
Yeah. So I think that coronavirus has to be thought of as a catalyst for the global deflationary wave that we're waiting for anyway, simply because the world is saturated with debt. And if the world is saturated with debt, it means it's saturated with leverage because everybody's gone into debt to bring the future forward and buy stuff that they shouldn't have bought. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's what debt does. All debt is taking future production and bringing it into the present in order to deploy it here in the present to try and lever that up and try and utilize that in such a way that you turn a profit on it. And that's what it's. And there's nothing wrong with debt, except when there's too much of it or when the debt's mispriced. And in a age of central banking, where the central banks, in order to maintain control, in order to maintain the current standard of living and asset prices, as we were talking about, we haven't showed you the price of the Dow, but everybody knows what's going on there. That when you're trying to maintain asset prices at a level that are higher than the fundamentals can sustain, because you're trying to continue to push sentiment momentum to the upside, thinking that that's all there is to markets. That's the mistake. That's the mistake of Keynesian central planning style economics. When you do that, then you wind up in a situation where everything can collapse. And so coronavirus is kind of that wake-up call. It's that straw that breaks the camel's back. It's a catalyst for change. We have markets that are incredibly fragile. The Fed's been in there mucking in the repo markets for months now. I've been saying since it happened. I remember reading an article by Jeff Snyder over at Alhambra Partners right after the September event where the secured overnight financing rate, the replacement for LIBOR, spiked to 11%, forced the Fed to come into the markets 2 days later and restart, not QE, but monetizing short-term debt. When that happened, he made the point that back in 2007, 2008, before Bear Stearns fell, the problem showed up in the repo market. LIBOR spiked 6 months earlier. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. The market and the Fed comes in to save the market and everybody trades on the hope that the Fed has everything under control, or the Fed and the ECB and the BOJ and all those, and the major central banks have everything under control. And so sentiment momentum keeps everything lofty and frothy for another 4 to 6 months or so. Well, where are we now? 1, 2, September, October, November, December, January, February, March.
March is the 6 months.
We're into 6 months. What a shock that right at the end of February, right at that time, I've been saying since this happened, we've got about a 6-month reprieve. And then the market going to react badly, kind of external shock. It'll take anything. So we had coronavirus, Brexit, Bernie Sanders winning a couple of primaries, right? Like it or not, around the world, we here in America, half of us hate Donald Trump, the other half, that 25% of us love him and 25% of us just don't care. I'll be honest, I think it's actually the numbers aren't quite as bad as that, but let's go with the pessimistic ones. Half of the people hate him. I think it's more like 15% of the people hate him, 60% don't care, and 25% of the people love him. I think it's really probably closer to real. But Trump is at least acceptable to Wall Street. He's not acceptable to the deep state. Bernie Sanders is wholly unacceptable to Wall Street. And if you look at what's been happening, Martin Armstrong's made this point before, and it's very, very powerful, but it's also not complete. I think it's a mixture of things that are happening here. That international capital is scared to death of Bernie Sanders. Trump is loved around the world. You go around the world and people think Trump is good for America. Okay. Americans aren't convinced Trump is good for America, but that shows us how powerful the propaganda is in our media. But in general, and amongst the investor class, they see Trump as pretty positive. And they like the fact that the United States is leading. They're not crazy about are they crazy about him tariffing the world and sanctioning the world? No. But in general, his policies are the most stabilizing coming out of Washington from a global economic standpoint that we've had in years. That he's targeting specifically people to crush, and they're mostly, frankly, irrelevant economies like Venezuela and Iran and Lebanon, right? And putting Germany on notice, but Germany's on notice on their own front. So I look at this and I say, these things are all. It's like everything else. It's they say about allergies, right? That to bring this back to the coronavirus, that allergies, you're not anymore. You're allergic to a lot of things. But what happens is you build up, all the allergens in your environment and in your diet build up to the point where, boom, you have a histamine reaction. But below that threshold, nothing is bad, right? So it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. So we're here. So there's the threshold for bad stuff to happen, and we're here, and then coronavirus.
Right.
Is the media here in the U.S. and Europe trying to play this up and make it even worse because they would like to lay the blame on Donald Trump if a bunch of people die in the United States to try and get Bernie Sanders elected? Yes. Is international capital happy about this idea? No. Is this why the Democratic Party is trying to pave the way for Joe Biden in a broker convention so that Hillary Clinton can step in and become the candidate? Yes. Because Wall Street wants a candidate on both sides of the equation.
Well, okay, we'll come to the Democratic Party, right? Let's stick.
Right, we'll do that in a minute.
This is what I can gather, right, from the stuff I've looked at, and I'm very interested in it.
Sure.
It's in terms of its fatality, it's not like as serious as like Ebola. It's way more infectious, and the concern is something like 15% of the people, like some figures that I looked at, 15% of the people who get it are knocked out. So then you can have people who are ill, unable to work or function, right. 15% of them of a workforce knocked out. That's going to knock out the supply chain.
Okay.
And then I think, and you can correct me here because this is where your expertise comes in.
Sure.
That will have a knock-on effect in terms of debts because the cash flow will
absolutely
be able to make debt repayments. You'll have a domino effect, and then you'll have global monetary collapse.
It sounds like you've been listening to my podcast.
I listen to your podcast every day. You and the Gerard, everything that comes out every day.
I'm picking on you, but thank you. That's my way of saying thank you for the softball. To be honest with you, but that's cool. No, it's all good.
Tom, sometimes I've learned from you, thought about things that are going to happen, and then you say that that's going to happen, and then it does.
Yeah.
That's you under your tutelage.
And I appreciate that. So no, that's serious. I just think it's fine, but you're absolutely right. The knock-on effect here, that's what the real worry is with coronavirus, right? That we're living in an age where we're at global debt saturation. The net dollar short position in the world is what, 73, 77 trillion dollars, some astronomical number, right? And that's including foreign corporate debt. That's including, that's including U.S. government debt, which, by the way, is now trading at an all-time low yield, so an all-time high price. While the markets are beginning to melt down, they're looking for collateral, and this is the interesting part about that. I'll get to the other stuff in a second. That why are U.S. Treasury bonds and why are U.S. stocks falling, but U.S. Treasury bonds rising, even though U.S. assets in general are still, the best looking ugly chick at the dance, because if the repo markets are stressed and people need short-term dollar funding and they don't know where to put their money, they're going to. We're talking about hedge funds here. We're talking about pension funds. We're talking about people. We're talking about banks who need to be able to get into the dollar funding markets and get access to the repo windows of various central banks. That doesn't exist at the ECB, which is part of the reason why the ECB is in trouble, because they can't do this. They can post U.S. Treasuries are the best thing in the world to post as collateral for a repo transaction. And that's why people rush into that. And it's part of the reason why you also see people rush into Swiss franc bonds, German bonds, UK gilts, that kind of thing, but to a lesser extent all the way across the board. So that's why we're seeing the massive, massive rally in U.S. Treasuries. I don't necessarily believe that it has anything to do with necessarily recession fears, that we have an inverted yield curve. I don't really buy that. I think this is more about repo collateral stress, which is part of the reason why gold got whacked. Because whenever there's stress in the repo collateral markets, gold gets whacked because gold is an easy source of dollars. It's an easy piggy bank for people to raise dollars. Okay, this is incredibly liquid. So that is a long way of saying, yeah, we got a debt problem. And when you have a debt problem of the magnitude that we have, taking a significant amount of China offline, even for a week, is a big deal. Taking them offline for over a month, it's a very big deal. And then that will spiral through. Now, will supply chains adapt to that? Well, on some things where there's high substitution for goods, yeah. But when globalization has driven most of the production of drug precursors, chips, all these things that China produces, and with good reason, because China, as Tim Cook had a great article, a great interview. He's like, about why is Apple in China? Because I can find process engineers in China. When I ask for process engineers to show up to do a thing, have a meeting with them, I get a room that can fill a soccer stadium. There's 10,000 of them ready to show up. In the United States, I can't fill a boardroom.
Right.
Okay. That's a fundamental problem of just reality. And so, like it or not, Apple's not in China for cheap goods. Apple's in China because China, for lack of a better or anything else, they're very good at process control. Their process controls and their supply chain controls are excellent. And honestly, they're better than they are in the United States. Now, we're better at thinking this stuff up, but they're better at implementing it, which has some interesting cultural, and implications, as it were. So this is what we're dealing with, and we've never seen this kind of supply chain disruption at the top of the supply chain.
Yes,
the global supply chain. And
it's not just the high-tech goods. I was in
the
shower the other day. I noticed my shampoo is made in France. The shampoo I was using, but 30%, something like 30% of the world global plastic production is from China.
Yeah.
So the factory in France can't get plastic bottles.
Right.
They can't sell their shampoo.
Right, exactly.
And people in France and Britain and elsewhere, neighboring countries, they'll have to have the dirty here, but that's just an example because plastic is used for everything.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, all the precursors, Trump sits around and crows about how we're exporting so much oil. We're not really exporting we don't export crude oil. We export product. We export naphthalenes. We export precursor, benzenes, and toluenes, and stuff, things that are used as precursors for building larger, ethylene diamine and things like that. I mean, I am a former chemist, right? So I know what most of these petroleum precursors are, and that's what we mostly sell because we have a tremendous refining capacity here in the United States.
Yeah,
and that's where our real strength is in the petroleum industry. It has been for years. We also use a tremendous amount of energy, but we use a tremendous amount of energy to support one of the world's most advanced economies. It's no shock. So It may be peaking, but it is what it is. And we have that discussion later, but you know, and
it's burnt for consumption, not necessarily for production of other things. Because the other thing that I was thinking, I remember growing up in the UK in the 70s,
right.
Britain had made its own cars. It's made its own TVs, you know, made its own matchsticks.
Yeah.
But now, no, 80% of our food is imported. And if people want a TV, well, you can't get a British-made TV. So I think the people that are going to do really well,
an American-made TV.
Oh, of course.
I mean, we might. RCA may have one factory left here in the United States, but they're uncompetitive. I think RCA was the last U.S. producer, and I may be dating myself from when I actually had, you know, black hair in my beard. Like, I'm dead serious. But yeah, no, I mean, they've all gone to this. They're all really just OEMs of, you know, Chinese off brands like Bank and Spectre and others, and they're just repackaging this. So it's only the high end brands like Samsung and Sony and that make their own TVs. All the former American leadership like RCA and Zenith and all those brands, those are all just OEMs.
Yeah,
ViewSonic, this is an OEM now. I mean, honestly, that's why whenever I big tip, whenever I buy new monitors, I don't buy name brands unless they're dramatically on sale. Because why? I'm spending $30 extra on a $200 monitor when I can get the same monitor with a different label on it for less.
Yes, yeah, and that will be harder. And then I think in the interim, who's gonna, before the remanufacturing takes place, because I think it is inevitable, especially in the UK, I suppose, because of Brexit as well, that people who are going to do well are those that can repair things and those that can make food.
Yep.
And repair your washing machine, because Britain had its own washing machines. It doesn't anymore, right? Now, the other thing that I looked at where it's going to have an impact in terms of the health consequences, and I'd be curious to know what you say in terms of the US, is if a 2% a death rate, like maybe let's say 2% of people in the UK need hospitalization, that's 1.5 million people. We have 140,000 beds.
Well, I don't think everybody's going to get it, so let's
let's
dial those numbers back a little bit. But I don't believe in 100%.
It's going to be low. Maybe even if it's 500,000.
Sure.
It's still, even if it's 140,000, that will displace all the other people with non-corona.
No. The strain on the healthcare system alone, if you get a 15% infection rate, right, or 10% infection rate, which is only, which is the limit of the number of beds you have.
Yeah,
and then 15% of those,
medical staff
will require hospitalization. That's still 20,000 beds.
Yep,
that's still an immense. That in and of itself is still an immense strain on the healthcare system. And what's interesting is no one is in a position. None of these governments, the Brits, the Germans, the French, certainly the United States, doesn't matter. They're not in a fiscal position to be able to handle this without printing tons of money or doing what they're going to be. If anything is going to happen here, Angela Merkel may have to loosen the purse strings in Germany just to pay for the public health care crisis that is potentially on the table for coronavirus. If we are looking at a global pandemic, which to this point we're not. But again, and I want to make sure that we keep this in the theoretic, because I'm still not convinced that we're ever going to get to that stage. And it's not that I'm not fearful of the virus or that I am discounting it or anything. I'm telling people, hey, stock up on 6 months worth of stuff, or 3 to 6 months worth of stuff that you normally use every day whose precursors come from China. So your medications, go ahead and buy 6 months worth of them, right? Go ahead and buy 6 months worth of paper towels and tampons and and all the stuff that you need, right, to get through toilet paper, because you don't want to be in a position where you have to be the guy, fighting somebody else for the last roll of toilet paper at the supermarket. So you're going to use it anyway. So spend an extra $50 today.
You save on the inflation.
And then there's the demand curve, and then there's the demand shock. But of course, you got to remember that we all practice socialist price controls. So price gouging is against the law, which is, by the way, pure on freaking everyday socialism. Oh, by the way, sorry, this is the anarcho-capitalist comes through. That's socialism. What Bernie Sanders is talking about is communism. This is socialism. Price controls, calling price gouging, raising, not allowing entrepreneurs to properly profit so that they can reinvest those profits in greater production later. Like, we go through this in Florida all the time. Every time there's a hurricane, they don't allow anybody to price gouge on roofing shingles. So that means that Corning can't put a third shift on to make more roofing shingles, which they're going to do at their inefficient asphalt plant that's fired by coal, and they got to pay overtime for. And they're going to produce those at 50 to 70% higher price. But they're going to get them to the market in a week as opposed to 5 months from now. So we can either pay $70 a flat to re-shingle our house as opposed to 30, or we can do with a hole in our roof for 5 months. Your choice. Because price and supply and demand are signals. And when you interrupt the signals, you interrupt the price. People would not be rushing out. We're already starting to see this. People fighting over, they're fighting over basic supplies over Costco for something that hasn't killed anybody here in the United States yet. Or maybe there's 2 people dead. That kind of thing bothers me, because if you allow the market to do what it needs to do, you tell people, calm down. At a certain level, you're inducing the panic by keeping prices low and then creating shortages. And that just feeds people's fears. Oh my God, this thing must be real because I'm not the only one who thinks this way. As opposed to walking in the store and getting angry, as opposed to walking in the store and not having the limbic reaction of having to pay $12 for a thing of paper towels as opposed to $3. Like, oh, they're $12 this week. I won't buy any. I have some. I'll use tea towels to mop up my messes as opposed to paper towels, and I'll throw them in the washing machine, which is what my wife and I do. Oh, by the way. Like, I can't buy a plastic straw in Alachua County anymore, but I can still buy paper towels. I'm waiting for them to get rid of those too. Trust me, it's coming. More socialism. People are insane.
And how is the U.S. Medicare system going to cope?
How are they going to cope?
Yeah.
Medicare will be fine because Medicare is actually decent insurance. Okay. Right. One of the things about all this in the end is that Medicare may actually be one of the best insurance plans in the country. Okay, because they so thoroughly cocked up private insurance, and they've done it on purpose, by the way, in order to get everybody on wanting Medicare for all. How do you get people to accept socialized medicine? Well, first you make private medical care arcane, expensive, and unreliable, and then you offer them a choice. The other choice, which is, oh well, it all works really well. Medicare works really well for old people. Why don't we just give everybody Medicare? Ta-da! There's your sign. It'll be fine. The government will have to spend a lot of money. Sure. Right. The Trump administration is already spending $1.3 trillion more than it's bringing in. What's 1.4? Especially in a world where the world needs dollars because they're so thoroughly short dollars. This is the only thing that's bailing out Trump at this point. I mean, this could be any president, because I got news for you. Doesn't matter if it was Trump or if it was anybody else. Hillary Clinton would be spending exactly the same way. She'd be using different language. She'd be using different rhetoric. She wouldn't be quite as blunt. Well, maybe she would be. She's Hillary Clinton. Yeah. But the numbers would be very close. Okay, she's only spending 1.1 trillion as opposed to 1.3 trillion. Okay, shut up. That's retarded.
It would still be the MIC.
Right, it's still $1 trillion more than you're taking in. Yeah, but the truth of the matter is that the world is so thoroughly short dollars that we have a dollar liquidity problem. So the United States pumping trillions of dollars into the global, the giant vacuum of debt repayment that needs to take place. That is taking place. Oh, by the way, those bills will still have to be paid. By the way. All the debt will still have to be paid at some point. But we're getting away with it because we've got incredibly low interest rates right now. Wait till the interest rate dynamic changes and the Fed has to go back to 6%. Then the United States budget collapses and the United States implodes politically. But at this point, that's not on the table. That's not going to be on the table until the rest of the world collapses first. And China is ready to take on all of that capital. And China is not ready for that yet. So we've got another 5 to 10 years of this nonsense before that ever takes place. Okay. But the Medicare system here in the United States will handle it. Trump will just spend an extra $100 billion. What's $100 billion between friends, right? And we'll move on. It's going to be and I've noticed this. The political left, both the good, they generally good. And if we start talking about Syria, I'll tell you, one of the good guys, B over at Moon of Alabama, they're salivating over the idea that the United States healthcare system is going to collapse over this. Mm-hmm. They won't say that public. They won't actually say that. But if you read their posts and you read their tweets and everything else, it's very obvious that they want Trump to fail. They want to blame. They want to be able to blame Trump for everything, and they want to be able to say, and they want to see Medicare for all here in the United States, and they want to see Bernie Sanders win. It's not going to happen. What will happen is what Trump is already doing. He's acting relatively calm, other than going after the CDC, which was a mistake politically. Even though, the CDC is run by Rod Rosenstein's sister, and she's pure never Trump. I don't care, You don't go after the CDC because 320 out of 325 million Americans, well, 324.9 million out of 325 million Americans think the CDC does a good job.
Right.
Politically, it's a fucking losing argument, dude. Come on, hold your water, deal with it. So I think Trump's reaction to this is going to be fine. It's going to strengthen his argument to close the borders.
Yes.
It's going to strengthen his argument to root out the corruption within all of these alphabet agencies and deploy capital better than they have previously. And so the reason why they're making such political hay is because he just submitted a budget that cuts the CDC's budget by 16%. Why? Because they're wasting money left and right, the same way that he just cut the National Security Council by 40%.
Yes.
He cut 75 people out of his National Security Council. And they were all Obama holdovers. So, of course, he needed to do it. But, he needed to do it 3 years ago. But he couldn't politically. He couldn't get away with it.
Well, I want to segue into something else that I didn't mention, and I was just reminded of. I saw a headline last week that Trump has approved $1 billion to be spent on dealing with coronavirus, which reminded me of an article I read in Zero Hedge a few weeks previous, that the US is spending $1 billion a day in Afghanistan.
Yeah. Well, and then they finally, oh, I know. And then they finally signed the preliminary peace treaty. It's no different than Obama's peace treaty, by the way, from 2014. It's, hey, yeah, we want to leave, and you guys are, and we hope you guys are on your good behavior. But if you're not on your good behavior, we're going to stay. So it's no different than what Obama did, which is right before the election. I think it was either in 2014 or in 2012. I think it was in 2012. He issued a troop drawdown, but there were caveats, and those caveats all got triggered, and then more troops went back in. It was a fake withdrawal. And I'm hoping that Trump doesn't do that. I'm hoping that Trump actually follows through here. And I think watching how he handles the situation unfold with Turkey and Syria will give us an idea of what he's actually got in mind for Afghanistan. And this is something these two things I have not talked about publicly yet. I was just starting to put this stuff together. Matter of fact, it's just kind of popping into my brain as we talk about this. But I think that it's probably what I'm going to talk about tonight, and certainly in the next article I write, that Trump becomes the pivotal figure here, because if Erdogan doesn't get any support from NATO, then Trump is serious about pulling the troops out of Afghanistan over the next 14 months and ending that cost. Yeah. So if we're not spending $1 billion a day over there, he wants to bring those troops home. If he can bring those troops home over the course of the next 14 months, he now gets that number down to spending only $1 trillion more than he was bringing it.
But will he get them, start withdrawing them before the election in November? Because that would really boost his support.
Yes, it would. And it's supposed to start happening within the next 3 or 4 months. I think I saw 13 or 14 weeks, something like that. Right. So it puts it in June. Okay. Right. And don't kid yourself. And this is me cynical. I'm going to put on my Dick Morris hat or my James Carville hat, right? The cynical hardcore politicos that advise these people. Yep. Ready? Pull troops out from the zip codes where you're vulnerable. So where are their hometowns?
Right.
So Western Pennsylvania, where Central Florida, blah, 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 all those, but North Carolina, places like that, which is, by the way, remember, that's where most of the military is from, the South anyway. So Trump pulling people out of and targeting specific zip codes. This is what I would be telling President Trump if I was one of his advisors. Absolutely. So I wouldn't even think twice about it. I'd be like, pull troops out on a zip code by zip code basis. You're going to play the same game that Obama did by zip code targeting, putting Somalis in Minnesota to turn it blue. All right, right? So, got news for you, dude. That's the game you're playing. And Trump is ruthless enough and is enough of a gangster to go, oh, that's an excellent idea. Yeah, raise for you. You get a raise. I'm like, all right, fine, whatever. I don't care. But Washington's too expensive for me to live in anyway.
Tom, what hope of peace still in Afghanistan without the Iranians being involved?
High anyway, because once the United States is gone, everything changes.
Say more about that.
I mean, the big irritant there, the Taliban had Afghanistan mostly under control before 9/11.
Yeah.
Right? Opium.
You and I may not have liked the...
Well, look, it's at the end of the day, you can either, it's like everything else. You can either have the world you want or the world you got. The world you got is that Afghanistan is not going culturally to become cosmopolitan
like Norway.
tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow. It's not happening. And so let's get beyond that, and let's get down the practical brass tacks, and realize that before we moved in and destroyed the country, the Taliban had opium production under control.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Opium production coming out of Afghanistan was nearly nothing. Okay.
Yep.
If anything, it was pharmaceutical grade. It was just part of the pharmaceutical supply chain. Today, it's off the charts because, of course, the CIA is in there. That's how they fund most of what they do. They're in Afghanistan, cultivating opium and then using that as an off books adjunct to their budget.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're doing. Anybody who lives in this version of my world understands this, right? Who's serious about geopolitics and is serious about this, understands that this is what's going on. This is the biggest obstacle to the United States actually leaving Afghanistan is there's two obstacles. One is protect the CIA's opium trade, and two is to leave troops there and leave bases there so that if there's ever that moment where we decide stupidly to attack and invade Iran, the troops are already there, the supply chains are already there, the infrastructure is already there. What will happen after we leave is the Russians, the Pakistanis, the Iranians will all move in. The Chinese, they'll all move in. The Taliban will start stabilizing the situation, and the situation will calm down pretty quickly. There's lots of factions within the Taliban. The United States is negotiating with one faction. The Russians and the Pakistanis and the Chinese are negotiating with others, and the Ashraf Ghani government in Kabul. No one, everybody pays lip service to that they actually negotiate with them. The pivotal figure in this, I still think, is Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan.
Mm-hmm.
And if the United States is serious about wanting to leave, then the situation will resolve itself over the course of the next couple of years. But the United States doesn't want to get that up. What's that?
How so, Imran Khan?
Well, we can't. Okay, so how's the U.S. going to maintain? There's two things. One, how is the U.S. maintain their supply routes into Afghanistan? Because the Russians have cut off supply flyover, so they got to come in through. They got to come in through Pakistan. That's one. Two, ISIS and Al Qaeda work. If Afghanistan and if the Taliban and Pakistan are not working together to limit the movements of both ISIS and Al Qaeda across the border in northern Pakistan, because that's what they do, then if they're not working together on this, then the situation will transfer south into Pakistan, and then it'll still be fluid. It's going to be up to Khan and him getting control of his government and being stable there. I'm not saying that this is, again, an easy task, but the United States doesn't want to give up any of their influence either in Afghanistan or Pakistan. They just want to bring the troops home for political reasons, and Trump wants to save money. But they still want to have their cake and eat it too. So now we just want to outsource our foreign policy to Pakistan and to the factions of the Taliban that we're negotiating with. And somehow we think that the Russians, the Iranians, and the Chinese are not going to fill that vacuum. That's crazy. So,
but at least they won't. They're not going to move in.
Well, no, they're not going to move in militarily.
No,
but it's but that's the issue here. And until the neoconservatives of the boomer variety are no longer setting policy in Washington, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, all of it, Russia, none of it's going to change. It has to change with a generational changeover. Okay, and right now, the Senate is Israeli-occupied territory. The National Security Council, State Department, CIA, they're all neocon, neoliberal, which are basically two sides of the same coin, occupied territory. President Trump understands that none of this is sustainable, and they all need to come home, and the troops need to come home, and it's not in our best interest. But at the same time, he wants to fight China on every front imaginable. Something's got to give. You can't have everything, and you can't starve the world. See, Trump thinks he can still prosecute foreign policy like he's starving out an old pensioner who's squatting on a condo in a building he wants to knock down to build a casino, right? We know this. We know that he's, lobby guys to get them to turn off the electricity and to do this and do that in order to get them, make their life, unlivable so that he can get the building. He's done this before. Right? That's who he is. Mm-hmm. And he thinks that he can do this with Iran, or Venezuela. And he's very frustrated in that these things aren't working. And John Bolton just fed him that line. And he's still getting that line from Pompeo, and he's still trying this, but it's not going to work.
No. And
at a certain level, I think he realizes that it's not going to work, but he doesn't have control over sanctions policy anymore. CATSA doesn't give him any control over sanctions policy. The U.S. Senate gave that power to Steve Mnuchin and Mike Pompeo. That's part of the problem. And politically, until he can get rid of both Mnuchin and or Pompeo, and I don't think that happens, any of that happens now until after the election. You know, how is Mnuchin still Treasury Secretary? They usually last 18 months. He's been in almost 4 years now.
Mm.
Think about it. And remember, Mnuchin is Goldman Sachs, but he's the only one. He's the only Goldman Sachs guy left in Trump's administration because Trump pissed off Gary Cohn, who's, by the way, one of the most evil men on the planet.
Okay. All right. Now, you were connecting Syria with Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on to Syria then.
All right. So what's happening this morning? So Elijah Magnier has a great article up this morning trying to explain what's happened over the last. We're doing this on Monday, March 2nd, right?
Yeah.
What's happened over the course of the last couple of days? It looks like Putin made a miscalculation. And it's a rare thing to actually say that because Putin rarely makes a miscalculation. But we also saw the reports that somewhere around 35 or 36 Turkish troops got killed in a Russian airstrike in southern Idlib. Now, the Russians thought that they were bombing Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or al-Nusra or whatever, but there were Turkish troops embedded. Okay? And apparently, according to Magnier's latest article, and I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on this because this sounds about right, Putin immediately called for a unilateral ceasefire on the Russian side. And he did so out of worry that they had made a mistake in killing Turkish troops because that's not his goal. His goal is not to fight Turkey, right? Just like it's Turkey's goal really not to fight Russia. But Erdogan is going to push the situation to the point where the Russians can't maneuver politically or militarily. This is what he's doing. So in doing that, Putin underestimated just how insane Erdogan is and how badly he thinks and how much he truly believes Idlib is now his territory. Originally, I firmly believe that Erdogan was originally promised Idlib and a 30-kilometer, 30-mile corridor across the northern strip of Syria. That he was going to get that added to Turkey. That was his gib for going along with the operation to overthrow Bashar al-Assad in Syria. Right, and then he can install his Takfiri crazies in a puppet government down in Damascus, and then he could send them all over the Middle East to wipe out the Shias, because that's what he wants to do, because he's crazy Muslim Brotherhood Sunni. Then he gets to declare himself Sultan, he gets to take over the Eastern Mediterranean, he gets to do all this stuff. Those plans have not changed. I think Putin underestimated just how Hitler-esque Erdogan actually is, and I'm not using that term lightly. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I don't normally invoke Godwin's law on the internet. You know me. I don't normally go that route, but I honestly think at this point we have to start ascribing Hitlerian levels of ambition to the Turkish president because of his actions in Syria and his willingness to turn on his partners, the people who saved his ass in 2018 and in 2016, Iran, Qatar, the Russians, Hezbollah, all saved his ass in the coup attempt in 2016 and the currency crisis in 2018. And he's and now he's actively biting the hands that feeds them. Mm. And now Putin's going to get this under control. And the Turkish army, if it wants to go whole hog into Syria, it's going to be very difficult for the Russians to stop that. The Russians don't have a strong position in Syria. And not a week and a half ago, I was chatting with a friend of mine, and we were game planning a blitzkrieg coming down out of Antakya in Hatay province, west of Syria, straight down to Latakia, and have him attack the Russian airbase at Latakia with armor and take it out. And there would be very little that Putin could do to stop that if he wanted to do it. And lo and behold, over the weekend, we saw Turkish-backed rebels firing missiles into Latakia.
Oh, wow.
So he's made strikes at the Queres airport, military airport, east of Aleppo, which is an incredibly important strategic position. This was the turning point originally in the entire war. The fight over the Queres air base in late 2015 is what started the process of the Syrian army taking back control of this country. You get the Queres air base, you now have operational flow into being able to take Aleppo back. Without it, you don't have anything, right? And that fight, I remember that Tepe Escobar talked about it. I talked about it. This was a big deal back then. So Erdogan's pushing from the north. We've got activation of ISIS and Al Qaeda cells coming out of Jordan and the Golan Heights, down in Daraa. They're trying to now stretch the Syrian army thin across 4 or 5 different fronts. And where do the Russians send their planes? And the Russians right now are politically a bit paralyzed by owing Erdogan 35 troops, in effect. And what happens between now and the March 6th meeting, between the March 5th, March 6th meeting between Erdogan and Putin? Erdogan's going to go to Moscow. Is he going to get the riot act read to him? Is Putin going to put sanctions on him? And I mean, I can tell you right now that the Turkish economy is in terrible shape. You've got a rising dollar that's undermining its foreign net debt position. There's $168 billion worth of Turkish corporate debt that has to be rolled over in the next 12 months. The lira is rising. Inflation is now 12.5%. Unemployment is still 13%. Erdogan's approval numbers are in the low 40s. After years of being off the charts high, he's lost regional elections in Istanbul and Constantinople. Not Ankara and Constantinople or Istanbul. And he's got real problems. And I think part of this is a PR stunt, and I think part of this is he's got his opportunity now to do what NATO wants him to do, which is to take control of Idlib and own it and declare it. He's already declared it Turkish property.
Wow.
I mean, if you listen to his speeches, he's already declared it Turkish property. And the Russians have made it abundantly clear that they are not, that the territorial integrity of Syria is a red line. This is our goal. And Erdogan is now trying to redefine in his mind what the territorial integrity of Syria is, because as far as he's concerned, he controls Idlib.
Right. So what can the Russians do?
The Russians, okay, so this is the interesting part. So there's the 1936 Treaty of Montreux, which gives the Turks control over the Bosporus, which is the exit point of the Black Sea into the Mediterranean. So the Turks get to say who gets to go through and how many get to go through. There's a very complicated set of limits as to how many U.S. ships can be in there, how many NATO, blah, blah, blah. This is why, by the way, the United States could not respond to what happened in Crimea in 2014 when the Russian troops, right? All we could do was send the Donald Cook over there. We couldn't send anybody else over there because the Turks wouldn't allow any more ships into the Black Sea. Mm-hmm. Okay. We have the Treaty of Montreux on one side, where Erdogan fundamentally believes he has control over the Bosporus, which he doesn't, by the way, because the Russians will just mine the entrance point on the other side, and then Turkish shipping is done. All right. So, but he thinks he has that, and then he has Article 5 of NATO in his back pocket. So he thinks that he can push the Russians to a point of trying to get them to attack him in order to get NATO on his side. Interestingly enough, France is backing his play in Syria. I wonder why. Right? NATO wants to be involved in Syria. The French and the Brits were behind the shoot down of the Russian IL-20 Eland plane back in 2018. They're the ones that shot the plane down. Putin had to blame Netanyahu for spoofing the Syrian air defense forces. I wrote an article about this back on Strategic Culture. You can go read it because there was no way that an S-200 could have shot that plane down. Joaquin Flores over at Fort Russ did the analysis. It was impossible given the timeline because the S-200s can't shoot that far. That plane was never within range of Syrian S-200s. So that story that went out there that Netanyahu had to eat crow when Putin dressed him down, that was Putin giving cover to France and or the UK because they're the ones who fired the missile to take down the plane, and they were trying to get the Russians to strike back. Because then, if the Russians struck back, then he attacked France, and now we've got NATO coming in on Article 5 thing to come into Syria.
Okay.
All right. That situation scares the crap out of me. And Macron is in serious trouble politically. in France as well. So, you know, what happens from here? The pivotal figure comes down to Donald Trump. As always, will he back Erdogan's play? Verbally, yes. Materially, so far, no.
Mm.
And that's a good thing, because at the end of the day, well, we hope that it holds this long. Pompeo is itching to get the Americans involved, but Trump won't sell them Patriots. He won't sell them, you know, he won't put American troops on the border to protect the Syrian-Turkish border. We don't see any of that, though there is a carrier group now in the Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean. The Eisenhower strike group just showed up. Got a couple of Russian missile frigates lobbing cruise missiles into Idlib with calibers, armed with calibers. You know that the Russians can pinpoint strike with ICBMs from the Caspian Sea, 1,100 miles away, and hit a house. You've got Iran and Hezbollah moving precision rockets in to defend the front lines from behind. And at this point, after Erdogan having attacked and killed IRGC and Hezbollah commanders in a drone strike behind the front lines, now these people are supposed to be his friends. He now brings Hezbollah and Iran directly into the fight.
Right.
And at this point, and then what happens? Do they strike back? At which point the Americans are like, "Oh, it was Iran attacking our NATO ally," and then that'll give them. So now we can move in on the idea that we're not attacking the Russians. I mean, how does this end?